Proceeding forward, we will now be witnessing the opening keynote under the heading of Reinventing Talent. To present that lovely note, I would like to call upon the man who has led over 250,000 Indian associates. He was the president of digital business and technology at Cognizant until recently. And prior joining to Cognizant in November 2020, he has served as a chairman and the president of Ciena India, a leading network solutions partner. He joined Ciena from IBM, where he led an 8 billion application service practice. He also served as IBM's global delivery leader and led a team of 90,000 through the company's next generation of globally integrated delivery capability. Before IBM, he led the Eastern region in the US and spent over 18 years at Tata Consultancy Services. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting to you the opening keynote speaker, Mr. Rajesh Nambiar, the Executive Council member, NASSCOM, the Chairman and Managing Director of Cognizant India. Please put your hands together for our opening keynote speaker.
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction and a great opening, Shrikant. It's my pleasure to be here amidst all of you. Look, this crowd is phenomenal. I mean, you're not only making a difference for your own industry, but you're making a big difference for India. And to be honest with you, I think the startup generation, especially the tech companies today, I think you make a big difference for the world. I mean, there's so much of optimism we see out of especially the startup companies in India. I believe this is a phenomenal position for all of us to be in India at this point in time. Yeah. Last week, I think it was last Friday, I spoke to a bunch of Thai entrepreneurs, and it was a great event. It's something very similar to this, much larger in terms of the. So I felt that some of the stuff that we spoke about, I probably would share here as well, and I thought it was very relevant for the group which was there. I mean, basically, I want to give you a sense of what I believe the companies and the ability for individuals to reinvent themselves is going to be a huge trait that all of us would want to, and all of us want to aspire for. And so that being a trait for any organization, we want to see what would be the right way for us to do that in some sense. Look, we've all seen organizations, small organizations becoming very large, which is very normal, and which is, I think we've seen that in several areas. We've also seen many successful organizations fail over a period of time as well. And that's something which we don't remember very well, maybe. Sometimes we do. And there is a reason why some of the successful organizations over the years fail to stay put or fail to stay successful over a long period of time. And there are a lot of statistics, and I want to see if we can give you some of those. If you look at the S&P 500, S&P is an index in the United States, and if you look at the list of S&P 500, 50% of them have dropped out of the list in the last 10 years, which means within a decade, there's a significant drop I mean, ideally, S&P 500 has a successful list of companies, and if they're dropping out of the list, the average time they spend in these coveted list is only 18 years now, compared to much larger than 80, 90 years over several years. Similarly, if you look at the Fortune 500 list, which was established in 1955, only 12% of the companies which was there in the first initial list of Fortune 500 is continuing to be in the list today, which means that a significant portion of them obviously was no longer in the list. I'm not suggesting that everybody failed, but I think I'm suggesting that there were companies who probably got merged out or bought off by somebody else, etc. And that's another reason why they would fall off the list. But significant amount of them actually did not make it in some sense, right? So that's an indication of the fact that for organization to thrive over a period of time, you do need competitive advantage, obviously, right? For organizations to even compete in the marketplace, you need competitive advantage. And what keeps you longer would be what we call sustainable competitive advantage. And for you to have sustainable competitive advantage, for organizations to have sustainable competitive advantage, unfortunately, there's a lot of external forces which actually challenges those competitive advantage over a period of time, right? Otherwise, companies would stay forever without, with just having one advantage and then sort of keep it for too long. But that's not the case. And these forces are multiple. I mean, there are some of them are internal. If you don't manage your organizations well, some of them are also external, right? The market changes which you see. There are, your customer base changes, the customer requirement changes. Suddenly the environment that you operate changes significantly. You do have macroeconomic forces, whether it is, currency inflation or the way the GDP works at a macro level, you might have some influences on that. Changes in technology, advancement in technology. Of course, and occasionally we also have things like pandemic, which kind of completely disrupts the whole and then challenges the whole competitive advantage everybody had. But in cases such as pandemic, whether it's COVID-19, which we saw recently, or continuing to see in some sense, these things don't challenge only one company. They probably challenge the entire industry, entire ecosystem, and so on and so forth. So how do you make sure that, despite all of these challenges that you will face, which will challenge your competitive advantage, sustainable competitive advantage, if you still want to survive in the industry or as an industry, then you probably need to, one of the things which will get you there would be the ability to reinvent. So that's what I want to talk about. What does it take for you to reinvent? And so reinvention, I believe is, of course, creating sustainable competitive advantage. Could be new product, new offerings. It could be, completely revisiting the way you did business and so on and so forth. But broadly classified into three main buckets. One is, of course, the business model reinvention. How do you really look at the business model, the way you sold, and the way you partnered, the way you priced, etc. is going to be very different from what you did previously. So there is a reason why you're going to do that differently. So business model reinvention could be reinvention of processes that you have within the company, how companies do things very differently to make sure that they stay competitive and then stay in the business. But the third biggest thing which I want to focus a little more on today, in the Thai actually I was speaking more about the business model reinvention, but we'll talk a little more about reinventing the talent base. Why talent is such a big thing for us as an industry, for all of you as companies, for all of us as companies. As a country, for example, talent becomes such a big deal. But before we go there, I just want to make a couple more points around companies which actually failed to reinvent and what happened. Of course, the much coveted example, if you may, or much spoken about example, as all of you will remember, is the companies like Kodak and Polaroid and so on and so forth. It's not because Kodak did not have a good IT, good research institutions, research wing and etc. So incidentally, I don't know how many of you know this, the first digital camera was actually invented by Kodak, but they really didn't succeed in continuing with it because they felt that the digital to replace the photography with the film-based photography is going to take a lot longer. Maybe it'll take 20 years for them to do it. But what happened was it happened in 2 years, right? Not 20 years. And then so they love, so it's the ability to cannibalize your core business, then get into something which is totally advancement of technology is something which they didn't see coming. And then they, of course, had some issues in terms of course, they reinvented themselves much later, but they failed that wave. And then as a company, they kind of had a huge issue, as you know. I mean, there are many, many examples. Blockbuster Video was another one which didn't see the change in buying pattern, and then people how they watched movies and so on and so forth. So they had an issue. Barnes Nobles didn't see Amazon kind of taking over their business in some sense. So that was another example. Something which all of you will remember is this whole Nokia, BlackBerry, how they challenged. So they, some of you might. This of course shows my age. And the initial smartphones were all, Trio, for example, and Palm. And BlackBerry obviously had a huge, the sort of the original version of the smartphones, if you may. Nokia tried its own, but they all got wiped off there was actually the smartphone market because of the fact that they really could not reinvent. They wanted to, obviously, everybody wants to reinvent, but they couldn't reinvent on time. Also, there's also a time factor to this, right? I mean, if you can reinvent after 10 years, but that would you would have left the game much earlier. The one industry I want to argue was done it decently well is the IT industry. I know that if you look at the IT software services organization, which is of course we're all here. thanks to NASSCOM. And as an industry, I think they've done a decent job. As all of you know, the ability for them to reinvent at every step has been phenomenal. Right? You know, the IT industry started off particularly serving the global market. You know, he started off with this, honestly, leveraging we call labor arbitrage in some sense. That's how we started in some sense, right? So some of they're called body shopping companies and so on and so forth. 8% of Indian GDP today is by these organizations, right? So it's a phenomenal shift from where you started. And of course, 1996 came around, and then there was this whole talk of year 2000, and there's a lot of work which was done, to remediate the year 2000 problem. Some of you are too young in this audience to sort of even recollect what happened in those days. But I think the whole shift from this arbitrage to leveraging the year 2000 problem, and as an industry and as companies within that industry, and then subsequently, when the year 2000 approaching, again you have a major shift, right? There won't be a year 2000 problem in year 2001. So what do? You have to reinvent yourself again. So there are multiple reinventions challenged on this industry. And I think the organizations did pretty well. After that, to sort of e-commerce, client server, and then of course providing much more capability, system integration, using that some of the foothold they gained over the year 2000 in terms of ensuring that we continued maintaining those systems. And so lots of reinvention you saw in the IT industry, all the way going into now today new age capabilities, shifting into IT years, product development. Of course, most recently the whole digital shift into how do we really make sure that we provide digital capabilities to the world and become India becoming a powerhouse from a digital talent point of view, which is what we will focus on a little bit. So again, broadly, reinvention into business models, reinvention into some of the processes. Again, we saw some of the examples. Again, even successful companies tend to reinvent even when they're successful. Amazon is again an example of how they started off with books. Now they're everything. We don't even know what Amazon is anymore, right? They're pretty much in every walk of life, and so that is a reinvention. And they're successful today, but the ability for them to sort of go into not just from a core business point of view, but also look at AWS, for example, was a very successful venture, and then it's become so well done. Xerox is a great example of how Xerox used to be. I mean, even today, I think it's almost a verb, especially in India, right? So you say, it's no longer copying; it's actually Xeroxing in some sense. So from that position today, Xerox is. They probably do less than 2% of their business from copying machines, and they probably do most of it from document management and other. So reinvention of, your core capabilities to something which is essential for you to survive as a company, which is critical. And processes, again, reinventing process. Netflix comes to my mind, from renting VCDs and movies to now streaming, etc. So for Netflix today, their actual competition is actually sleep. It's not Amazon or somebody else, right? I mean, so sleep is competing with Netflix, because either you sleep or you watch Netflix. At least the rest of the world probably does that way. I do both at the same time. I sleep and watch Netflix, which is a problem by itself. But anyway, from a process point of view, how do you reinvent? Again, airlines. Again, if you see the way they were able to go after the pandemic, especially when they were coming back. Most of the process today, when you check in online and you check your bags online, all of that. So many of that, kiosk-based check-ins, and many of that got reinvented. So process reinvention leads to resilience in some sense, and those reinvention make you more resilient. So actually, if the pandemic has taught one thing for companies around the world, it is, if you go back and look at probably. Before, let's say pre-pandemic, organizations were all into efficiency. It doesn't matter what you do, but you got to do it efficiently. That was the whole thing. So you made your supply chain so lean and mean so that you have the best efficiency. You made the product the best place you can do. But the moment we were hit by the pandemic, we could see that efficiency is no longer was valuable, because you had to have resiliency built into that. So yes, you could do everything from China, you could do everything from somewhere else, and all of that, dependency on any one country, one region, all of that were questioned. So today, it is a toss-up between efficiency and resiliency. So you got to be efficient, obviously, and you don't have a choice, but you can't be only efficient and not have a strong say or a strong way to make sure that you are also resilient in some sense. Okay, so let's shift to this whole reinventing of the talent piece. But I have lots of examples of what companies did. Maybe I'll say one or two more before we go to the talent. One of the things which I found is extremely interesting was this cotton processing company in Noida. The moment they were all set to sort of do this launch of this cotton processing center, and they were doing decently well. I think they launched it about a year before the pandemic hit. The moment the pandemic hit, there was no need for whatever they were doing, and then they were able to, on a dime, within 10 days, they made the company to making cotton swabs. So from the cotton processing to this, they started making cotton swabs, which are not, before that it wasn't available, not this ear swabs, but this medical swabs which are used to test for COVID, RT-PCR, and so on and so forth. So they were able to make the shift. Again, reinvention of business model, reinvention of processes, reinvention of talent happened just like that. And Hula Global is another example of apparel manufacturing company. They did the same thing in terms of making PPE kits and masks, and they were all doing pretty well. There are many, many examples, and the examples from restaurants and some of the work from the people who are doing a co-working space such as Homescape. They started selling work from home furniture to the people who are actually now need it, rather than having them going to an office and so on and so forth. So let's go back to this talent thing which we are talking about. Look, I mean, when you look at the need for talent and then the ability for us to reinvent the talent, again, I would go back to the IT industry example. We knew a few things, a trick or two in terms of reskilling, ensuring that they were upskilling and so on and so forth. But that alone may not be sufficient for us to, in terms of the amount of skill set that you require for this country as a whole, this industry, and of course for you all as individual companies. And talent becomes such a critical component. Fundamentally, I think even the IT industry now learns to look at talent a little more broad-based than before, because before it's all about computer science graduates, hired from certain university and so on and so forth. But I think today, companies such as us, Cognizant, for example, for that matter, many of our peers would hire doctors and pharmacists and so on and so forth, because we do have a healthcare practice, and how do you really make sure that talent is also sort of built and integrated with what we do, all of that. So I think it's a very variety of talent that you need. And I almost think that there is a new normal these days for talent, right? And that came because of this increased demand for digital talent. And this increased demand in digital talent comes from all the individual businesses that you see, which requires talent. Today, it doesn't matter whether you're an IT company or a product company or a software company and so on and so forth. Even if you are in any business, you do need digital talent for your business to run. And that has actually increased the demand on the skills. And of course, the pandemic didn't help as well. And the whole hybrid mode of working and its own challenges. It may be good for the people, but may not be that good for the companies in sometimes, because people can sort of switch companies, as all they had to do was switch laptops. That's all they did. They didn't have to go out anywhere. If you take the new company's laptop and you're pretty much done. Sometimes you don't even have to leave the old laptop. You can have both and then work for both companies, right? And it's a separate topic altogether. Some other time we should have a discussion on moonlighting and whatnot. But I thought there were broadly 5 aspects, and then I will wrap it up with that. One was around how do you bridge the talent gap, which is demand supply gap. It's huge, right? I mean, today one of the NASSCOM reports says that India is about 21.1%, roughly about 20+% short of talent, digital talent, the right talent. I mean, we have enough graduates coming out of our schools and colleges, but I think that's not good enough, right? I mean, you do need industry-ready talent, and it's a huge issue today, and the gap is continuing to increase. By 2026, the digital talent is expected to be short by 1.4 to 1.8 million is what is going to be a shortage pretty soon. So that means there is huge demand for it, and this digital demand will only continue. And then the definition of what a digital talent is also going to be changing, evolving over a period of time. I just, before we walked in here, we were at the speaker's lounge upstairs, and I had I'd met a lovely lady called Sai, who's the chief product officer for matrimony.com. And I was just asking her as to what is the biggest challenge in, I'm so sorry, Sai, I'm quoting you here, and I hope you approve of it. It is talent. I mean, she said, I would have thought that, there are other issues that should be grappling with. It is, every company is a digital company. Every company is a software company at the end of it. And, the skill shortage, of course, in technology, also in product development and so on and so forth. And the way they deal with it, so they do make sure that, they need the right capabilities within the organization to even, go ahead and get whatever they need to do, right? So, and this digital adoption, of course, of many companies, whether it is cloud, AI, ML, etc., is actually driving many of these in some sense. So, of course, to make sure that you are able to bridge this gap, collaboration across ecosystem, whether academic, working with universities, academia in general would be one of the things that we need to do. But then there is also things which we do in NASSCOM, such as future skills, for example, not just the IT's capabilities, but also capabilities around everything that we do. And the second aspect of what I want to talk about was also the, there are other venues how we can challenge or how we can get over this talent issue would be looking at other options, such as the, how do you leverage the low-code, no-code platform, we call LCNC. The low-code, no-code platform has been around for a while, and that is not seen the, has never become prime time, but it is time that it will become prime time, right? So because of the fact that you have speed to value, speed to market, and you need fewer customizations. If you really want to deploy something, every product vendors, I'm sure there are some of them in this room, you would think that your product will have to be implemented without any customization in some sense, right? But that doesn't happen. Unfortunately, you need to have some level of customization. So the LCNC allows you to do a little bit of customization, but not a whole lot, right? So that's the whole positioning of LCNC. And again, Gartner says by 2024, 65% of all the applications which will be deployed will have some form of LCNC. Again, there are a lot of, I'm not necessarily saying that that's the only thing you need to do. There are a lot of limitations of LCNC. And, obviously there's an increased participation from candidates who are not necessarily tech graduates as well into making LCNC. So if you're good in marketing, and then you understand to implement technology for marketing, you could actually leverage LCNC to actually do a better product than maybe somebody who's writing code in C++ or something from the scratch. The third element of the first was around this whole, how do you leverage, how do you make sure that you minimize the demand-supply gap. Second was leveraging platforms such as LCNC. Third was around creating career tracks for tech career tracks. So that's something which in companies we have to do. Unfortunately, industry cannot do much. I think many companies, such as, again, I can talk about our own company, Cognizant, but also many companies we have to provide a tech track, which means that, a general assumption in the industry is that if you want to grow in the organization, you have to become a manager, you have to become a people leader, and so on and so forth, which may be the case for maybe 75% or 90% of the cases. But it is important for you for the companies to make sure that technology by itself, ability for technocrats to exist and then continue to be the technical expert over a period of time is important, right? Whether you become an IT specialist or you can become an architect, you could also become a distinguished engineer in the same track if you may, and ultimately maybe a fellow in some sense. All of that is important to make sure that you don't have to manage people to become successful in a company. Ability for you to reward and ability for you to contribute, ability for you also to sort of, make some, money, if you may. Still being a technocrat is so important because otherwise we will kill the technology prowess which exists in the market today. And of course, the next element I want to talk about is also the, how do you make sure that you're creating a diverse workforce? You create a workforce in talent is shortage because we have not really been exploring the rest of what we could actually bring into the table. The DEI, for example, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of this is going to be very critical. I can look at this room and I can tell you that our diversity is not good enough, right? But it is important for us to make sure that we do have the right set of actions, removing unconscious bias, for example. It's not that people wake up in the morning and say that I want to go against a certain set of population, whether it is the gender or whether it is LGBTQ, for example, or people with disabilities and so on and so forth. But I think it is important for us to continue to our focus on on bringing in the diverse talent, which will increase your talent pool. All I'm trying to say is that if you want to reinvent your talent base, you got to be looking at these aspects such as what we talked about, including the last one which I want to say and then wrap up this conversation would be, how do you really build trust in the hybrid model? Because the hybrid model, before all of this pandemic, I think managers and leaders and everyone, they knew how to manage a big group of people because they were all coming into office, right? So that was easy. I mean, so everybody's in the office, so you know you have water cooler discussions, you know, all of that, which is great, right? And then you have a meeting, everybody shows up in the room, fantastic. Pandemic hit, everybody went home, which is not great, but then at least they learn to shift from managing people when I see face to face versus managing people remotely. Of course, technology such as, you know, Zoom, Team, whatever it is, you know, WebEx. I don't want to be biased towards any one technology here, but all of them, right? If I haven't mentioned something, please forgive me for that. All of them did a fantastic job of enabling those remote management. So they learned how to manage on the ground, then they managed remote. But now we're going to the third phase of hybrid, which is very confusing, right? You know, now half the people are in the room, half the people are you know, hybrid, half of them come on Monday, half of them come on Saturday. All of these things, you know, hybrid work model, we haven't realized the challenges it will throw in terms of managing talent, managing workforce. So that's going to be a big deal. As a manager, how are you going to assess your performance? You know, if you have 10 people, you know, 4 of them work from home, do they get disadvantaged? You know, as I suppose the 6 who show up in the office. Out of the 6, maybe 2 of them show up in the office only for 3 days a week. What happens to them? So all of these challenges are something which we need to be careful about when we're managing talent as a whole, and how do you really build an inclusive culture and make sure that, you know, we are able to you know, get everybody along when you do that. So let me conclude. Again, thank you for having me here. But, you know, look, small or big, you know, companies would need to create sustainable competitive advantage, as we spoke about in the beginning, right? And to create sustainable competitive advantage, you will get challenged by external or internal factors, whether it is market, whether it is COVID we talked about, technology advancements, so on and so forth. And to sustain or develop new, again, sustainable competitive advantage, you need to reinvent yourself. When you reinvent, you know, it'll also be a responsibility for the entire ecosystem. And then when you reinvent, you know, make sure that other than the business model and the process that you reinvent, we also need to focus on talent reinvention, starting with yourself, with ourselves as leaders, all the way to the team. So leaders, you know, obviously prepare the talent of the future, and how we manage talent will determine how successful we are going to be as a company, as an individual, as an industry. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.